Hey, Jennifer here. This is a messy family drama with a clear turning point. Someone tries to push and it backfires in the best way. Let's dive in.
My husband's family spent $73,000 of my daughter's inheritance in one day. No one likes her, my sister-in-law said. Let's pretend we are family, my niece giggled. They didn't expect the police to show up at the hotel that night. It was a little after 4 on a Saturday, and I was standing in my kitchen with a dish towel over my shoulder when my phone lit up with a transaction alert from my daughter Isabel's new account. When Beatrice's trust finally transferred to her after her 18th birthday, Isabel had kept me on the alerts for a few weeks because the setup made her nervous, and the number on my screen was enough to make my stomach go cold. $4,862.17 at a luxury boutique inside the resort. This was supposed to be a quiet birthday weekend with my husband Christopher's sister Denise, Denise's husband Greg, their daughters Morgan, Alyssa, and Abby, and Morgan's boyfriend Shane. Isabel had described it as one shared suite, one nice dinner, a pool, and cake. She had packed sneakers, a paperback, and one blue sundress. She had not packed for a shopping spree at a place where the handbags sat under spotlights. I opened the banking app and checked whether it had posted by mistake. It hadn't. The charge was real, pending, and tied to the card Isabel carried in the side pocket of her tote bag. I stared at the merchant name for 3 full seconds, then hit call. By the time it started ringing, I was already afraid I knew who had touched that money first. Isabel answered on the 4th ring, but I could barely hear her over bass, laughter, and the sharp crash of too many people talking in a closed space. "Mom," she said, and she sounded far away, not like she was walking around and not like she was focused on me. I asked where she was, what boutique she had gone into, and why there was a charge on her card that looked like rent. "We're just hanging out," she said. But then somebody squealed right next to her, and another voice, female, older, careless, said, "Tell her everything's fine." I knew that voice. "Denise." I said Isabel's name again, slower, and asked her to step somewhere quiet. Instead, I heard a burst of music, a door opening, then Morgan, Denise's oldest daughter and Isabel's 21-year-old cousin, laughing like I was a joke that had interrupted a good night. "Aunt Rebecca, seriously, she's okay," she said. "It's her birthday weekend." Isabel came back for 1 second, just long enough to say, "I'll call you in a minute." And then the line went dead. She didn't sound scared. She sounded handled. I did not wait for that minute. I went straight into the account history and watched the weekend change shape in real time. The boutique charge was followed by a $1,940 electronics purchase, then 2 spa services, then a room service order large enough to feed a softball team, then premium pool cabana access, then a minibar authorization, then a jewelry counter charge. I refreshed the page and saw more pending transactions stack in a neat line, each one too polished and expensive to be accidental. Each one attached to the same resort where Isabel had told me they were keeping it low-key. There is a point where spending stops looking messy and starts looking organized. This was organized. Somebody was moving through that property with purpose and an 18-year-old's card. I checked the total twice because the first number felt impossible, and while I was staring, another authorization landed. It was not one dumb decision, one overexcited dinner, or one bottle service mistake. It was a full afternoon of people treating my daughter's inheritance like an open cash drawer. I remember setting my phone on the counter very carefully, as if anything sudden would make it worse. By then, I knew this trip was not happening around Isabel. It was happening to her. Christopher was in the garage sorting through a plastic bin of extension cords when I walked in and held my phone out without saying anything. He dried his hands on his jeans, looked at the screen, and the expression on his face changed before I had finished explaining. He didn't ask if maybe Isabel had gone wild. He didn't tell me to calm down. He looked at the merchant names, the room charges, the spa charges, and said, "Denise." Then he called his sister. No answer. He called again. Straight to voicemail. He called Greg next, and Greg picked up long enough to say, "We're in the middle of dinner, man," in that greasy, half-amused tone that made my husband's jaw lock. Christopher said, "Put Denise on." Greg said, "Relax, everyone's having fun," and hung up. Christopher stood still for one beat, then grabbed his keys off the workbench. "We're going," he said. "Now." I asked if we should keep trying Isabel first, and he said, "We'll call from the car." He already knew what his family was like when money was in the room. The decision took less than 30 seconds. That was the moment we stopped treating it like confusion and started treating it like a scene we had to walk into ourselves. The resort was just under 2 hours away, and every mile made the number uglier. I had already called the bank from my kitchen, but the account was in Isabel's name alone now, and without her on the line they would only flag the activity, not shut down the mix of direct card purchases and room charges already being posted through the hotel folio. Christopher drove with both hands locked on the wheel while I kept refreshing the account, reading each new charge out loud like I was documenting weather: upgraded suite, salon service, steakhouse, private lounge tab, gift shop, designer sunglasses, late-night dining credit. Once, Isabel texted me only 3 words, "battery dying love," and that helped exactly 0. Christopher tried Morgan, then Elisa, then Abby. No one picked up. He tried Denise again and got sent to voicemail so fast it might as well have been manual. The sun was going down, the road was narrowing, and the total kept climbing in clean, absurd jumps. "If she gave them the card for dinner, that's one thing," I said, though I didn't believe it anymore. "My sister doesn't stop at dinner," Christopher said. He was not defensive about them. He sounded tired in a way that told me this pattern was older than our marriage. Another alert came in while we passed a gas station and a dark lake on our right. I read the amount, and Christopher laughed once, without humor. By the time we saw the resort lights ahead, I was no longer wondering whether they were using her money. I was wondering where my daughter was while they did it. The place Isabel had called a nice hotel looked like a wedding venue designed by people who never checked prices. There were stone columns at the entrance, fire bowls by the valet stand, white orchids in the lobby, and a pianist in the bar wearing a jacket that probably cost more than my first car. Nothing about it said modest family getaway. Christopher and I walked in wearing jeans and road dust and went straight to the front desk, where I gave Isabel's name and watched the clerk's eyes flick to his screen and then up to me with professional caution. He would not discuss individual charges, but he did confirm she was a registered guest on a suite booked under her card, and that her card had been placed on the resort folio at check-in. There was more than one room attached to that folio, more than the one suite Isabel thought they were sharing, along with on-property charging privileges. Of course there was. Christopher asked where Isabel was, and the clerk said he couldn't disclose guest locations, but when Christopher gave his own last name and said very flatly, "That's my daughter," the clerk's eyes flicked to the suite number on his screen before he looked away. We took the elevators to that floor and followed the sound of Denise's voice spilling into the hallway. The carpet got softer, the walls got quieter, and I could feel the whole night pulling tight around one fact. Isabel had not described this place honestly because she had not been told the truth herself. The hotel was expensive enough to make bad intentions feel normal. We found the suite before we found Isabel. The door wasn't fully closed, and voices were spilling into the hallway with the easy, lazy confidence of people who think the person they used is asleep somewhere else. I heard Denise first, my sister-in-law, telling someone not to worry about checkout until tomorrow because she still has plenty. Then Morgan laughed and said Isabel was so desperate to be included that all they had to do was stay sweet a little longer. Another voice, Alyssa, the 19-year-old cousin, asked whether Isabel would notice the extra shopping bags. Denise said, "No one likes her." Like that settled it. No one's going to ask questions anyway. Somebody else joked that Isabel should be grateful because this was the most attention the family had ever given her, and more laughter followed, light and cruel and comfortable. Then Morgan giggled and said, "Let's pretend we are family." And Denise answered, "Exactly." No one inside sounded drunk enough to be confused. No one sounded ashamed. They sounded efficient. Christopher looked at me, and I knew from his face that he had heard exactly what I had heard. I did not push the door open right away. I stood there with my hand at my side and let the whole thing settle into place. That was the moment I stopped hoping there was a misunderstanding. At every big family gathering, Isabel had learned how to stand near warmth without ever quite stepping into it. I can still see her at 14 in Denise's kitchen on Thanksgiving, holding a can of ginger ale while the cousins crowded around the island making plans for an ice rink that night. Morgan was choosing songs, Abby was begging to ride in Shane's cousin's car, Alyssa was taking selfies with my mother-in-law in the background, and Isabel kept hovering close enough to be useful. Denise handed her a stack of paper plates and said, "Can you run these out to the patio, honey?" in the same tone people use with a polite neighbor kid. Isabel did it, of course. She always did. Later that winter, she passed Morgan in the hallway at school and got a quick smile without the stop, the shoulder touch, the "come sit with us" that Morgan gave other cousins. Christopher used to say they were just loud girls, and Isabel was quieter. He wasn't wrong about their personalities, but he was wrong about the math. Quiet children still notice where the circle closes. They notice who gets called back when they drift. They notice who gets left holding cups and coats and empty serving trays. Isabel was never openly pushed out. She was simply trained to live on the edge of the frame. The pattern got easier to see at events too big to hide the hierarchy. At Morgan's graduation party, the backyard was full of folding chairs, balloons, and relatives with paper plates, and Denise's branch of the family ran the whole afternoon like they were hosting television. Morgan picked the playlist, Alyssa positioned everybody for photos, Abby decided which cousins were taking dessert to the fire pit later, and Greg told stories loud enough to pin the conversation around him. Isabel was there in a yellow dress, carrying a wrapped gift and trying not to stand with just the adults, because she wanted badly to be included with the younger set, even when they made it look effortless, and she never quite knew where to put her hands. I watched her smile when Morgan said, "We're all going out after this." And I watched that smile disappear when Denise added, "Just the usual girls, sweetheart. Small car." Isabel acted like it was fine. She helped collect the ribbon scraps from the table instead. The public events always worked that way. At birthdays, holiday dinners, and backyard parties, she could not be excluded because too many people were watching. But movie nights, quick dinners, mall trips, and casual Saturdays somehow formed themselves elsewhere. Isabel kept confusing proximity with invitation. She kept thinking one more appearance would change the category. It never did. When Beatrice died, the room shifted before anyone admitted it. Beatrice was Christopher's older aunt, a quiet woman who wore good wool coats, sent exact birthday cards, and believed in libraries more than vacations. She and Isabel had not been inseparable. They had been something steadier and less dramatic. Lunches a few times a year, books in the mail, long conversations when Isabel was small enough to still ask blunt questions adults usually dodge. We expected a routine estate meeting after the funeral, not a bomb in a conference room. But the attorney opened the folder and explained that Beatrice had left a trust worth $1,184,000 to Isabel, available when she turned 18. Isabel actually looked behind her, as if maybe there was another Isabel in the room. I reached for her hand under the table. Denise, who had been dabbing at her eyes with a tissue 10 minutes earlier, sat up straighter and asked how distributions worked. Greg asked whether there were restrictions on housing, education, or family support. Christopher went still beside me. Isabel whispered. Why me? Because she really did not know. I think Beatrice saw what the rest of them missed. A girl who listened, a girl who remembered details, a girl who had not yet learned that wanting family can make you expensive. Grief was still in the chairs with us, but money had already taken the head of the table. After the inheritance became known, Denise's side of the family did not transform overnight into cartoon villains. They got warmer by inches, which made it more dangerous. Morgan started texting Isabel first. Alyssa wanted to know where Isabel bought her boots. Denise suddenly remembered little things about her schedule and asked if she was free for brunch or shopping. Abby, who had barely spoken to her at Christmas, began sending her dumb videos and inside jokes that had never existed before. The change was small enough that anyone could deny it if I pointed straight at it, but it was there in the tone, the frequency, the new insistence that Isabel was one of the girls. Christopher saw it too. One night in the kitchen he said, "I hate that this sounds paranoid, but I know my sister." And I said, "It doesn't sound paranoid. It sounds late." Isabel heard us. She told me I was being unfair. "Maybe they're just finally trying," she said. "Maybe they grew up." She was 17 and still hungry for proof that she had been misread, not sidelined. Denise started talking about making Isabel's 18th birthday special, about memories, about experiences, about how family should celebrate family. The line moved so smoothly it almost looked natural. For the first time in her life, Isabel was being courted by people who had once barely noticed when she left the room. So when Denise proposed the birthday weekend, after months of warming Isabel up, and just as the trust became accessible, it came wrapped in exactly the language Isabel had wanted to hear since middle school. Just family. Just a nearby resort. Just a nice dinner, some pool time, maybe a little shopping, something modest to mark adulthood. Denise said Christopher and I deserved a break from planning everything. Morgan said she wanted cousin time. Greg called it finally doing right by Isabel. I told my daughter very plainly in our laundry room while she folded t-shirts into a duffel that having money did not mean owing people a piece of it. I told her kindness and access were not the same word. She rolled her eyes, but not cruelly. "Mom, I'm not stupid," she said. "I'm not handing anyone my life. I just want one normal weekend where they actually want me there." That was the sentence that beat me because it was honest and because she was 18 and legally in control of the account. I could advise. I could not forbid. Christopher backed my warning, but he also believed Isabel deserved the chance to make her own decisions with family who should have behaved like family without needing a lecture first. We let her go with an overnight bag, a new sundress, and more hope than cash should ever buy. A few hours later, my phone told me exactly what they thought that hope was worth. I pushed the suite door open only as far as I needed to and said the only thing that mattered. "Where is Isabel?" Denise looked up so fast she almost dropped the stemmed glass in her hand. Morgan turned on the sofa with a shopping bag at her feet. Alyssa froze with her phone half raised. Greg was near the wet bar, Shane by the balcony door, Abby cross-legged on the carpet with a dessert spoon and that startled expression teenagers get when adults finally arrive inside the joke. Christopher stepped in beside me, and whatever fake casualness they had been wearing a second earlier went stiff around the edges. Denise recovered first. "Rebecca," she said, smiling too hard. "We didn't know you were coming." I didn't answer that. I asked again, "Where is my daughter?" No one said the wrong thing, and that was almost worse, because I could see all of them calculating at once. Morgan crossed one leg over the other and looked at her mother instead of me. Greg put his glass down like he was suddenly sober. Denise's mouth flattened for half a second before she smoothed it back into something social. Christopher did not raise his voice. He just stood there, looking at his own family as if he had already left them. Nobody answered fast enough. Silence has a way of confessing before people do. Denise finally gave us a shrug so light it felt practiced. She got tired and went to her room, she said. It's been a long day. Don't make this dramatic. There was a tiny laugh after the sentence that made my skin pull tight over my arms. Morgan joined in with one of those little cousin giggles that says the adults are overreacting and the real truth is too obvious to explain. I did not challenge the story yet because I wanted the room number more than I wanted the satisfaction of watching Denise lie badly. What room? I asked. Denise picked up her phone, squinted as if she had to search for information she obviously already knew, and said, She's fine, Rebecca. She just needed sleep. Christopher took one step forward. Room number. That was all he said. Denise looked at him, and whatever she saw there made her stop performing. She gave us the room number. Morgan added, She was having fun, Aunt Rebecca, in a tone that tried to pin this on my personality instead of their behavior. I ignored her. Christopher and I turned and left without another word. Behind us, I heard Denise say, too loudly, I really don't appreciate being ambushed like this. The fact that she still thought manners were the issue told me exactly how protected she felt. Isabel was alone in the separate room they had booked for her under the same folio, and that was the first thing that made the lie look uglier than simple greed. She was fully dressed on top of the blankets, one shoe off, one still on, her phone dead beside her, and her makeup smudged into the pillowcase. I said her name once and got nothing. I touched her shoulder. Nothing. Christopher moved past me fast then, sat on the edge of the bed, and tried harder. She made a soft sound, rolled a little, and opened her eyes halfway, but they did not focus. Izzy, he said, using the name he had called her since she was 2. Look at me. It took long seconds for her to recognize us. While I was standing there, my phone buzzed with another alert. I looked down and saw a fresh charge for more than $2,000 from the resort's luxury retail wing, time-stamped 2 minutes earlier and charged to her room. My daughter was half-conscious in a hotel room, and someone was still shopping against her account. I showed Christopher the screen. He shut his eyes once, then opened them and said, Stay with me, kiddo. Isabel tried to sit up and couldn't do it cleanly. Her mouth was dry. Her words were thick. Nothing in that room looked like restful sleep. Someone was still spending while she could barely hold her own head up. The smell hit me when I leaned in to move her hair off her face. Fruit, sugar, and alcohol trying to pretend it was candy. Did you drink? I asked. Isabel blinked at me like the question had to swim a long way to reach her. A little, she mumbled. They kept... Then she stopped and closed her eyes again. Christopher got her a bottle of water and held it while she took 2 shallow sips. I asked who gave it to her. Denise's name came out first, then Morgan's, then a broken version of They Said Birthday Girl, and just one more. That landed harder than the charges for me, because under 21 in the U.S. is not a gray area at a resort, and because Isabel was not a kid who snuck around with fake IDs and big stories. The only thing I had to compare it to was a family city break we took in Germany, where she had legally tasted 1 glass of wine with dinner and turned pink and sleepy halfway through her pasta. That was her entire history with alcohol. Now she was limp in a resort bed, too groggy to track a question, while her aunt and cousin kept feeding off her account next door. There is a point when selfishness sharpens into method. That was when I stopped seeing a spending spree and started seeing preparation. Christopher stayed with Isabel while I went downstairs and asked to speak to hotel management and security. I did not go in angry. I went in specific. My under 21 daughter appeared to have been supplied alcohol by family members on property, I said. She was currently impaired in her room, her bank account was being hit with large suspicious charges, and I needed to know whether your staff had served her directly. The manager's whole posture changed at her age. He denied immediately that the hotel would knowingly serve an underage guest and called security before I finished my second sentence. A man in a navy blazer led me into a back office with 2 cold air and 4 monitors on the wall. They asked where Isabel had been dining, what time, which relatives were with her. I answered everything. The manager kept repeating that if alcohol had reached her, they needed to establish how. He was protecting the resort, not helping me out of kindness, but I did not need kindness. I needed speed. One of them found the restaurant camera angle. Another checked the lounge area outside the dining room. They would not promise me copies. They did promise to review it immediately. For the first time that night, the lies had met a building with liability. They did not hand me footage, but they showed me enough to change the whole case in my head. On the restaurant camera, I could see Denise ordering drinks for the table while Isabel sat stiffly at the end, smiling the polite smile she used when she wanted to seem older and easier than she felt. Later in the same sequence, Denise leaned toward her and slid a bright drink across the table. Isabel hesitated. Morgan, legally 21 and old enough to know exactly what the risk was, leaned in from the other side and said something that made Isabel give a small, embarrassed laugh before she picked up the glass. A little later, another angle showed Morgan coming back with a fresh drink of her own, sitting beside Isabel, taking a sip, then passing the glass over as if that made it harmless. Denise kept watching. Not accidentally, not from across the room. Watching, encouraging, making sure the glass ended up in my daughter's hand. They showed me one more stretch where Isabel tried to stand and looked unsteady, and Denise touched her elbow with that fake, caring little gesture some women use when they are staging concern. I thanked the manager because I am a civilized person even when I hate people. Then I stood up. They had not found a drunk 18-year-old and made bad choices around her. They had worked on her until she became useful. When I got back to the room, Christopher was sitting on the edge of the bed with Isabel propped against the headboard and a wet washcloth in her hand. She looked younger than 18 then, not because of her face, but because betrayal strips people back to the age where they first learned to hope. I told him exactly what the hotel had shown me. I did not soften it. Denise had ordered, Denise had pushed, Morgan had backed her up, and the hotel now knew my daughter had been underage. Christopher listened without interrupting, then looked at Isabel, then at the transaction total on my phone. It had climbed again. He asked one practical question. "Will hotel security document what they saw?" I said yes. He nodded once and stood up. Isabel whispered, "Am I in trouble?" And I knelt beside the bed and said, "No, you are not the one in trouble." That seemed to surprise her more than anything else. Christopher put on his jacket and said, "We are done keeping this in the family." There was no yelling in his voice, no speech, no final chance offered to Denise because he knew what she would do with it. I looked at my daughter, then at my husband, and felt something in me go flat and calm. I was done asking bad people to behave like relatives. We made the report that night, not the next morning when everybody had time to line up a cleaner story. The officer who met us in the hotel security office did not treat it like vacation drama once he heard the pieces together. 18-year-old victim, under 21 for alcohol, visibly impaired, suspicious spending continuing while she was asleep, hotel management willing to document what they had reviewed. He asked for Isabel's age twice, then asked whether the money came from a recent inheritance and whether she had full legal access to the account. Christopher answered most of the family questions because it was his sister, his nieces, his people. I handled the financial timeline because I had the alerts, the screenshots, the order of the charges, and the exact minute my daughter had stopped making sense on the phone. The officer took notes, called another unit, and told hotel security to preserve the relevant footage. He did not promise me anything dramatic. He did not need to. The The seriousness was already there in the way he separated the facts and wrote them down one by one. This was no longer Denise's favorite kind of problem, private, emotional, and easy to blur with guilt. Once it became a report number, the story stopped belonging to the people who had spent the money. By morning, Isabel's color had come back enough for the shock to land cleanly. She woke confused, saw Christopher in the chair and me by the window, and immediately assumed the issue was only the drinking. "I'm sorry," she said before she even sat up straight. "I didn't mean to—" I cut her off and told her to open her banking app. Her phone had enough charge now. She signed in, blinked at the first page, and then started scrolling. I watched the number hit her in waves. Boutique, electronics, salon, jewelry, room upgrades, food, drinks, premium add-ons, separate charges from places she never even entered herself. $73,000. Her thumb stopped moving. "No," she said softly. Then again, sharper. "No, I said dinner. I said I'd cover dinner and some stuff. I never—" She looked up at me with a kind of shame that made me want to tear the walls open. "What if I said something when I was drunk?" she asked. Christopher answered before I could. "Confused is not consent," he said. "Impaired is not permission." I told her the hotel had reviewed footage and that this was not fuzzy. This was a group of adults and near adults using alcohol and family language to keep her compliant long enough to keep charging. The worst thing on her face was not fear. It was humiliation that she had wanted them to like her that badly. Hotel management asked everyone tied to Isabel's folio to come downstairs while the charges were under review. And the confrontation happened in a private breakfast room off the lobby because Denise still thought spaces could save her. She came in with Greg and the girls wearing the brittle confidence of people who plan to survive on tone. Morgan crossed her arms. Alyssa kept checking her phone. Abby looked terrified now that adults with badges had been seen in the building. Denise started first, saying Isabel had offered to treat everybody because it was a special weekend and that the totals only looked large because upscale resorts charge in weird ways. Greg added that families blur expenses all the time. Morgan said Isabel had been laughing, having fun, saying yes to things all night. Isabel was pale but steady when she answered. "I did not agree to $73,000, she said. "I did not tell you to buy yourselves clothes and electronics. I did not tell you to use my card while I was asleep." Denise tried to pivot back to feelings. "We are family," she said. "We don't nickel and dime each other." Right then my phone buzzed with a front desk notification that an attempted late checkout and breakfast service charge tied to Isabel's room had been declined because the folio was under review. Even then, even after the report, they had tried one more reach. Christopher looked at his sister and said, "You don't contact her again unless it's through me or an officer." Even with the floor dropping under them, they were still reaching for her wallet. They never got the chance to settle into a better lie because the two officers who had responded the night before came back before Denise finished her next sentence. There were no sirens, no spectacle, nothing cinematic. Just two officers stepping into the doorway with hotel security behind them and asking for names, dates of birth, and who had occupied which rooms. Shock works differently on different people. Greg tried to switch into practical man mode and started over-explaining. Morgan went pale and angry at the same time. Denise smiled for half a second, as if charm had solved things before and might again, then saw that no one in the room was there to be charmed. Shane moved backward so fast he almost clipped a chair. Abby burst into quiet tears. The officers separated Isabel from the rest of them and spoke to her with the care you use on someone who has been embarrassed and harmed at once. They asked Christopher and me for our timeline. They asked Denise and Morgan about the drinks. They confirmed with hotel staff that relevant footage existed and that account-related issues had been flagged overnight. Denise tried once more with, "She said it was fine." But the sentence sounded small now, because this was no longer a family argument where volume could beat precision. It was a record, a sequence, a set of names attached to decisions. They had spent all night controlling my daughter. By then, they had already lost control of the story. 6 months later, most of the money was back and none of the relationships were. The recoverable purchases, designer clothes still tagged, electronics still boxed, accessories, unopened cosmetics, even a few items Greg had apparently been stupid enough to leave in their original packaging, were returned or clawed back, and between reversals, restitution pressure, and formal consequences nobody laughed about afterward, about $58,000 was restored. Roughly $15,000 was gone for good into hotel charges, meals, drinks, service fees, and consumed extras you cannot uneat or unsleep in. Denise's side of the family stopped using the word misunderstanding once papers started moving and officers kept asking for details. Isabel cut contact completely. Christopher made no heroic speeches. He just stopped smoothing things over, stopped forwarding apologies, and stopped pretending blood automatically outranked harm. That mattered more than drama would have. Isabel changed too. She took a financial literacy course at the community college before starting her first semester away, moved her accounts, set spending controls, and learned that generosity is a gift, not a doorway people are entitled to walk through. Sometimes we still talk about Beatrice and what she really left behind. Not just money, a hard lesson, yes, but also a line Isabel can now hold without shaking. Being wanted had always been loud around that family. Being loved turned out to be much quieter and much safer. Do you think we were right to go to the police? Let me know in the comments. And if you liked this story, please subscribe for more.